Guys, good morning. All right, so let's start the session. So, we were being discussing in the last session, we were being discussing about whenever you try to perform a DML operation, particularly on a setup object and a non-setup object, but in the same transaction. So inside in the same program, if you would try to perform any sort of DML operation, that DML could be like insert or maybe update or any kind of DML. But if you're trying to perform this within the same program, but let's say if there are two objects, one of them is setup, another one of them is non-setup, then in that case, we face an error called as mixed DML operation exception. And I guess I have created a program for this by which I also have demonstrated the same thing. Let me just try to find out that program. All right, I'm closing everything out of this, and I guess I have a program, common helper, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so you can see with this program, we were having a use case where we should deactivate a user and insert a record inside hiring manager. So there were two separate DML operations was projected out of them two. Out of these two, like there was we have to deactivate a user. The second was about, I mean, this was about an update operation. This was about an update operation, and the second one was about the to insert something. Now see, now see, basic. Just a moment. 1 second. Oh yes. So in this program, we were trying to perform two separate DML operation on all the two separate objects, but one of them was user and another one was hiring manager. Now see, we have discussed one thing like what is a setup object, by the way. So setup object are particularly those a kind of objects which could directly interact with the Salesforce metadata, isn't it? There is a certain object, there's a category of a certain objects, those who could make a direct interaction with the Salesforce metadata. So I have even explained you with one diagram in the last session, like what is a Salesforce metadata and how does the entire force.com platform is being structured. All right. So there are a few of the objects which could directly interact with the Salesforce metadata, and I have told you to find out the list of all of the setup objects in the setup objects in the Salesforce. Here are a few of them. Here are a few of them. User object, profile, and there are so many others as well. Document is there, custom object, custom tab, workflow, validation rules. So these are some of the objects. These are some of the standard objects, by the way. Setup is always a standard object. There's no custom object, which tends to be a setup object. There's always a standard object. Apart from this, apart from this category, every other object, whether that is standard or it is a custom, that falls under the non-setup. So what we have seen with this program was like, when I try to execute this program, if I try to execute this program, we got an error. We got an error called mixed DML exception, right? We got an error called mixed DML exception. This is that error. Mixed DML operation, mixed DML exception. So basically, this error, every time it is going to be get generated whenever you try to perform, the DML on setup as well as non-setup. So how we are going to handle this situation? So let's talk on to the second perspective of this discussion. And this is a very common interview question as well. This is a very common interview question. So they would ask you like, have you ever faced mixed DML exception error? You'll have to say yes, yes, but not in my real time. Because see, if you know, if you already know that if you would combine these two objects in the same transaction, you're going to see this error. When you already know the result, why you are going to intentionally commit that mistake? So obviously you're going to say yes to them, but then at the same time, you'll add a note to your answer that, yeah, I know, like when this mixed TML exception occurs, I've seen that error, but not in my real time work because I know like why this is generated and how to avoid it. Let me talk on this. So mixed DML exception is generated whenever you try to combine the DML, you try to perform the DML operation in a same transaction or maybe in a same program. If you're trying to perform DMLs on setup as well as non-setup object, then you are going, the Salesforce does not allow you to perform this. And Salesforce will give you this error. So this is the cause of that. Now let's talk about what is a solution. What is the solution? How to handle this kind of situation? So basically, what to do in this case? Yeah, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use future method in this case. I'm going to use future method. Future is not a class, future is a method. I have told you. You're learning four different types of asynchronous quantities like batch program. Batch is a whole class. Schedulable you are going to learn after this. That is again going to be a whole class. So it is like batch is a class, schedulable is also a class. Future is a method, and queuable interface after this is also a method. So there are two of them which is applied on the class level, and rest two of them are applied onto method level. Remember this, right? Let's move on. So what I'm going to do, see, in this program, I have created only one method, this one, do DML operation. How we usually apply this future method, right? How we usually apply the future method is like, I would be creating another method inside in this. So what I'm going to do would be like, this is my one method. This is my first method. Just below to this first method, I would be creating one another method. So public static void, let's say create HR record. Public static void create HR record. And see, this is my logic. This is my logic that is used to insert one record inside hiring manager. So I would be separating this logic from that method to over here in this method. So basically, what now becomes, it becomes like this is a separate method, this is a separate method, and this is a separate method. But I wanted them to be a part of same program. So what I'm going to do see, here this whole method was present, right? Here this whole method was present. So I would be, I would be invoking the, let's write down the second method. I would be invoking the second method over here. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I would be calling this method. How to call it? It's very simple. You just have to call the name of the method, right? And give a semicolon, of course. So now let me save this program. So see what I just have did. I have created two methods, although there's first method do DML operation. There's one more method called as create HR. I'm dedicating this method just for deactivation of the user. But then, and again, this method is used to insert the HR record. This method is used to insert the HR record. All right. But then, because these are the entities of same program. I mean, it's not like this is a separate business logic and this is a separate business logic. No, it is something not like that. So what I did is like, inside in my first method, when this execution would be completed, right? When this execution would be completed, it is going to invoke the second method. Acha, one more thing. If you would still execute, you are going to get the same error, right? Even though if you have created two separate methods, don't think like it is the error has been gone. No, it would going to give you the same error. Why? Why? Because there are even though if there are two methods, but they are still a part of same transaction, and that is what is causing this error. And we cannot, I cannot say that let's have two separate transactions for this. If the requirement is within the same transaction itself, you have to perform. How can you split the transaction? So you have splitted two methods. I have created two separate methods, but then there is a chaining between them. After execution of the first method, whatever the business logic has been designed inside in the first method, once that is completed, it is calling the second method. Inside in the first method, I'm calling the second method. So yes, of course, there is a chaining. There is a chaining from, there is a chaining from, there is a chaining from this method to this method. And this has to be like this only. Don't think like you can separately call them. What is the meaning of calling them separately? There would be two separate transactions. And we have to maintain this whole process in a same program, in a same transaction. In a same transaction. That is the important thing. All right. So even though if you split this into two separate methods, you're having one method for setup object, another method to perform the DML on non-setup object. But then because there is a chaining from one method to another method, it is still showing us the same error. So this was like step number one. This was like step number one. To create two separate methods, one you can create for setup and another one for the non-setup. Now, anyone among these two, anyone, there's no specific set of rule for this. Anyone among these two, either this one, do DML operation, or maybe create HR record. Anyone among these two, you can make it as future method. How? At the rate future. This is an annotation which what we have to use. At the rate future. At the rate future, this annotation is a sort of keyword what you can apply. So at the method level, before the method, you have to make a use of an annotation called at the rate future method. At the rate future method. Now this error is going to be first of all, this error is going to be removed. I'll show you the output, and we are coming back to this, and we would going to discuss on to this fact. What has been happened internally that we have removed that mixed TML exception error. How this has been handled. All right, we're going to talk on to that. Mostly क्या होता है कि ट्रेनिंग्स में सिर्फ इतना ही कवर करके देते हैं, क्या पहली बात तो कवर करते नहीं, अगर कर भी रहे हैं तो दे वुड जस्ट टेल यू दैट if you are combining setup and non-setup, then make a use of future method over here. So future method is going to handle, but I mean, the discussion ends. But what is that difference that internally has been made by using a future method, by using this annotation future? How this error actually has been gone? Nobody is interested in to tell you that. And some even is the student these days, they don't have any curiosity to ask anything. So in the training, they would tell you like, okay, fine. I mean, if you would make one method, just try to separate the logic into two separate methods and then make just one of them as a future method. And you're going to get the rid of this error, mixed TML exception. All right. Why don't you think beyond this? Why don't you think? Why don't you ask what actually has happened due to which, I mean, if you have defined a method as a future method, what actually has been happened by which this error has been removed. So we are going to talk on that as well. All right. We are going to talk on that as well, but let me first of all show you the output. All right. So what we are doing, guys, we are deactivating a user. So I would be going to Salesforce, and then, I would be going to users. I'd be going for users over here. I am also, and then on another tab, I'm opening hiring manager. So we have this development user 208 @training.com. This user right now, as you can see, is an active user. All right, is an active user. So after that successful completion of program, this is going to become deactivated. And right now, we are having 309 records. So after insertion of one record, this is going to become, the count is going to become 310. So that is what it is expected by this program. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So let me now execute this once again. Common helper along with do DML operations. Yes, I'm going to execute this program. So now, as you can see, we have not encountered that error. First of all, we don't have seen that error. All right, we have not seen that error, and let me take you back to like what has been happened. So now, if I would refresh this interface, so you can see like development user has been deactivated, right? Development user, as you can see, has been deactivated. That was the first thing. Here I'm expecting the count to become 310, and that is also all right. So that means one record has been inserted. So with this, we have verified that this program is working good. And first of all, it has deactivated one user. And it has also inserted a record. All right. चलो तो एक चीज तो पता चल गई यहाँ से कि how to how to avoid this mixed TML exception. First of all, why it is generated, how to avoid that. So when you wanted to avoid, this is the way. First of all, divide your logic into two separate methods. Acha, in a program, one more thing, there can be only one future method. Listen this. Sometimes this is also asked. For example, if you are saying to them, I would create two separate methods, let's say one for a setup, one for a non-setup, and then any one of them I could make it as a future method. They can, for to confuse you, they could even ask you, all right, so you are having two methods in your program? You will say yes, do DML operation, create HR record. Create HR record is that method where you converted this method into future. All right. They would say, let's say we have three methods in the program. Can we make two of them as a future? The answer is no. Answer is no. In a program, only one method could be a future method. Pani bhare kya? In a program, only one method could be a future method. All right. So there cannot be more than one future method inside in a program. वैसे भी जरूरत नहीं पड़ती है उसकी. I mean, if you wanted, you can even have some more logics over here. आप जितना चाहे उतना business logic बढ़ा सकते हो यहाँ पे. ठीक है? So even though if you wanted to perform something else apart from just inserting hiring manager record, you wanted to update the contact, you wanted to insert opportunity, that everything you can perform over here. Inside in this method, there is no such rule that one method is just for one business logic. No, I can use the same method for any number of business logic. अभी इसके पहले भी तो मैं वही कर रहा था. do DML में मैंने दो चीजें combine कर रखी. तो as many number of business logic you can have it inside the same method. You don't require to have separate methods for every business logic. This is not a rule. We try to make it distinguish. We try to make it distinguish. Just for the simplicity purpose, for more readability, we do this. Otherwise, this is not a rule. So even though if you have multiple things to perform and you wanted all of them to be a part of future method, you have to create only one method and make it future and just have everything inside in that method. All right. This is not allowed that you could have multiple methods for and you can make it a future in the same program. So this is what is the talk is. All right. So I'm going to talk about like what actually happens when you make a method as a future one, and then how this error has been removed, right? Just give me 2 minutes for this. I'm pausing for 2 minutes. I'll be continuing it. Yes. Let's now understand how come this error has been removed. What happens when you make a method as a future method and which would avoid this mixed DML exception. All right. So prior to this topic, we have learned about something called flex queues, isn't it? We have learned about flex queues. Anyways, let me take you back to that discussion once again. Yes, and then this and development. Mm. Oh, yeah. See, I told you that from spring 2019, Salesforce has introduced one more queue for the asynchronous operation, and that queue is flex queue. Before the introduction of flex queues, there was only one queue called Apex queue. And Apex queue is this responsible, like, without Apex queue, the synchronous is not possible. Apex queue is responsible. Apex queue is that's very important entity by which the asynchronous Salesforce can execute a program asynchronously as well. So because of all these queues, we can only have batch programs, schedulable future, and everything. Queues are very important, all right. But then there was only one queue called Apex queue that time. And Apex queue was only, was only able to store 5 jobs. It was only capable to store 5 jobs inside in this. So a lot of the discussion has been happened with this, and Salesforce even has realized that yes, of course, we should increase the capacity. And that's why from Spring 19, they have introduced this Flex queues. Now, Flex queue is another queue which is attached to your Apex queue and which works relatedly to with the Apex queue only, but it can store 100 jobs inside in this. So that's why like the capacity has been increased. That's why the capacity has been increased. Uh, I guess I was being asked this question when I was giving interview in the RC. So he asked me like, how many asynchronous jobs you can put into the queue? How many asynchronous job that you can put inside the queue? I have given him the answer 105 total. He asked to me how. So I said, yes, I'm elaborating you that. See, after Spring 19, we also have flex queues. Flex queues are capable to store 100, whereas your conventional Apex queue can store only the 5 jobs inside in this. So technically, if you are combining the capacities of both of them, then you could actually have 105 pending jobs, 105 asynchronous jobs inside in the queue. That's how I have handled this question. Now see, so what happens, let me come to the discussion which we are having right now. So basically is like, basically when you define a method as a future method, this becomes a job. This becomes a job. This whole method, create HR record, because out of these two methods, only one method is a future method. I can show you that as well. So if we would go to the setup menu for this, and if we would go to the jobs, and when you go to the Apex Flex queue, it has been transferred. I guess we'll have to go with the, yeah. When you go to the Apex queue, do you see? Do you see this? A future method has been executed. The name of the class was although common helper. The method name was create HR record. So only this method, create HR record, is considered to become the asynchronous, right? This method is still synchronous. And this method would be executed synchronously only. But because this method, you have made this method as a future method, this method is going to execute it asynchronously. So what happens is like, the method which you have made as a future method, the method which you have made as a future method, that method, I mean, that method matlab a complete job. इसको आप पूरा एक set समझो. This would go to flex queue. This would go to flex queue. And obviously from flex queue, it would go to Apex queue. It would go to apex queue, and from apex queue जब भी Salesforce का जब भी सर्वर खाली होगा तो वो यहाँ चली जाएंगी. ठीक है. But the method which is asynchronous, the method which is let's consider this is R1, request number R1, and let's say this is R2. All right, let's say this is R2. So what is going to be happen? The R1, because that is an asynchronous method, would straightforward go to the Salesforce server for its execution. Whereas this R2, the job R2, which is asynchronous, why? Because it's a future method, that would go to Flex, and from Flex it goes to Apex. So that go to R2. R2 goes over here. Now see, because R1 is in a separate place and R2 is in a separate place. R1 is executing synchronously, whereas R2 is executing asynchronously. That would create two separate transactions internally. This is how. And previously what was happening, even though if there were two methods, all of them were getting loaded into server direct. मतलब हम इसके पहले क्या हो रहा था? This was completely a whole set of program. अब वो पूरा program with these two methods are getting loaded inside server, and that's why it was not allowing you to do the same thing. But now what has been happened? It has been split into two different parts. One of them is synchronous, that directly goes to server as a normal execution, whatever we have learned so far. And the second one, because that is an asynchronous, that becomes an asynchronous job, because you have made it as a future method, that goes to the Apex. I mean, from the Flex, actually, it goes to Flex queue, and from Flex it goes to the Apex. So even though if it is there inside Flex or Apex, more importantly, what we have to understand over here is that this would create two separate transactions. Like R1 would be executed separately, whereas R2 would be executed separately. And of course, it would execute it. Let's consider after the processing of R1, when R1, server would out R1, that R1 has been completed. And when it is empty, it would going to take, the request R2, request R2 over here. So this will become the server is executing only one request at a time by splitting, even after splitting them. So this is how, the future methods are executed. And this is the reason why server would not give you that error, because it is not performing. Listen this carefully. Listen this carefully. Whenever you have defined a method as a future method, whenever you defined a method as a future method, that method, whenever you define a method as a future method, listen this carefully. This is moral of the story. Whenever you define a method as a future method, that method would be executed separately. That method would be executed asynchronously. That method would be executed separately, asynchronously, apart from all other business logics what you have in the same program. So if you have one method, two method, three method, you can have hundreds of them. All of them, let's consider this is the only one method. Let's consider we have 50 more methods. Let's consider all 50 of them would be executed synchronously. They would directly go to the server for their execution. Whereas this method particularly will go to Flex, and from Flex it goes to Apex. And after the execution of all these 50 methods, once they are been completed and they have been out from the server, this is going to be get loaded. So this execution of this method, execution of a future method is never done along with the other methods. Salesforce internally would create two separate transactions for this. One for rest of them, all synchronous, and the another one for the asynchronous. This is how the execution is separated. This is how the execution is separated in two separate transactions. And because if there are two separate transactions, the mixed DML exception has been avoided. Because the only reason of getting mixed DML was, the only reason of getting mixed DML exception was performing DMLs on setup and non-setup within same transaction. Within same transaction. Now, if it has been separated, here also like DMLs are performing, but then DMLs are performing on two separate transactions. That's why there is no question of getting mixed DML exception to be get arises. All right. So this is what was mixed DML exception. This is what was setup and non-setup object. This is what it was, how this error is generated, how this error has been handled, and what is the role of a future method over here, and how internally the future method would handle all this. Right? This was the whole area of discussion. I have covered everything out of this. I have covered everything, and that's why it would require two separate sessions, I tell you. All right, so that's all. In the next lecture, I'm going to start with the queuable interfaces. There are a few of the theoretical things what you have to go with this, right? So this also has been completed. Yeah, go with this all theory. If you are calling a future method inside an API application program interface, you have to make call out equals to true. These are some of the interview questions as actually. One future method cannot call another future method. You cannot supply S object as a parameters. You can't supply S object as a parameter to future method. If you are trying to do that, you are going to get the error. That means, although I'm going to cover this in the next program. Don't worry. Don't worry. So in the next, I'm going to start with the queuable interfaces. That is just an enhancement of future method. Future method have literally 2 or 3 drawbacks with them. So whenever uh, how to handle those drawbacks, we are going to make an understanding of queuable interfaces. Is going to be the next topic. That's all for today. Any questions from your side? Please let me know. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? All right then. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good day.